Geopathic stress and life after death. How are these two things linked? Well, I'm Tim Walter. I'm a house healer and alternative life coach. Here on this channel we look at a practical spiritual approach to life, and we do that mainly by exploring the subjective nature of our realities with mindfulness, meditation and dowsing. Today I'm talking with Master Dowser, house healer and author, and my friend Adrian Incledon-Webber. As you'll hear in talking about geopathic stress, we cover life after death from a house healer's perspective as we discuss his latest book, Heal Your Home Too. Stick with us as Adrian will be back very soon for our next live Q&A. So get those questions ready and join us on Wednesday, the 11th of August at 3:30 p.m. BST. And don't forget to click on the thumbs up and subscribe if this is the sort of thing that you're interested in. And in the meantime, here's our conversation about life after death and geopathic stress. Adrian, you're known as a house healer. What is a house healer for those people that aren't aware?
It encompasses so many things. I started off literally as a house healer, I would have probably said in inverted commas, stemming from my estate agency background. You'd walk into people's houses and it would just feel wrong. It just had a strange vibration to it, a strange energy to it. And I really didn't understand much about energy in those days. And when I finally got out of the estate agency business, I've been doing quite a lot of healing. And I just thought one day, look, people coming to my house, getting healing work done, that's fine. And it was working okay. But of course, as soon as they got back into the environment, which was often causing the problem in the first place, then it doesn't matter how in-depth the healing was when they were with me, it could have only lasted maybe hours, days, or maybe a few days. So I got to thinking, look, it's all well and good doing work on individual people when they're in the house with you or in my healing room. But if they get back to the house and it's negated, we've got to start looking at the house. So it was very, very basic. But my first few questions were quite basic, looking at earth energies, because I've been running the Earth Energy Group for the British Society of Dowsers for a number of years. So obviously I had to start somewhere, and it was really underground water, energy lines, and so on. So that was kind of really the early house healing work that I was doing. And as with anything, I always tended to put the question at the end to say, is there anything else detrimental to the family I need to find? And that's really how we've now got up from probably 15, 16 questions in the early days up to 57 now. So house healing really is looking to not just clear the family, but very, very much work on the house, clearing away the old vibrational energy that people have left behind. And it doesn't matter whether it's a brand new house or it's 400 years old. A brand new house, the builders will leave all their vibrational energy, their emotional energy, the decorators, the electricians. And of course, if it's a very, very old house, you've got all the different owners who have lived in there would have left an essence of themselves behind, which need to be cleared, as well as all the earth energies, the underground water, and also the family dynamics too. Of course, families are not necessarily in conflict with each other, but day-to-day niggles, kids going through puberty, newborn babies or whatever, it's all going to cause a certain amount of emotional stress. So that has to come into it as well. So house healing, as you know, Tim, is a very all-encompassing thing to do.
I think, one of the things is it's like, there's not very many people that have really heard of house healing out there in the more mainstream world, shall we say. But dowsers, the dowsing community has been looking into geomancy or this house healing process, as you say, with underground water and all of these influences upon a person's well-being. They've looked into it for decades and decades and decades, haven't they? And it always really stems from that kind of concept of earth energy itself.
I suppose if you look back, it started off, had its roots probably with Feng Shui thousands of years ago, but a lot of the experiments, a lot of it was brought to the public knowledge back in the 1920s in Germany, when Baron von Pohl did his early works in Wilsberg, looking at sort of cancer houses and the effect of water on people living in them, or people living long term in these particular properties. So it's been very much sort of following in his footsteps. But try to bring it all up to date rather than just stay in the 1920s.
Your first book, Heal Your Home, has been incredibly successful. You've sold thousands of copies of that. So what made you feel that you wanted to do a second one? So Heal Your Home, in fact, here you go, look, Heal Your Home too, sitting there on my desk. What led you to sort of want to write that one?
The second book was very much more as a follow-up rather than an update to the first. Obviously, energy patterns in the planet are changing all the time. And in my introduction in the new book, it was saying that I really don't want either of my books to feel old. So often happens, you pick up a book from a library, or you go into a secondhand bookshop and start reading it. And it's fine, but what happened in the 80s kind of stays in the 80s, and the same in the 90s. So it's very much looking at the new questions that have come through, stuff that I've learned, but also it was trying to, rather than doing all case studies as I did in the first book, it was really trying to explain to people how I found out about the questions in the first place. So it was really trying to explain the history of why the new question has come through, and how I found it and the effect that it had on families.
So really what you're saying is that actually Heal Your Home 2 is actually almost more of a complementary edition than a sequel, should we say?
Absolutely. But of course, in between, you and I wrote Spirit on Earth, which is wonderful. And again, it's selling well. It's a very different book. But yeah, I think Heal Your Home 2 had to be written. It was, I don't know, you said you get the writer's itch, which I never thought I would ever have. But it's something that it was quite a personal book to me as well. There's a lot of stuff. I put stuff in about dementia, with using my father as a case study for people to be able to perhaps understand, maybe help to explain what dementia sufferers are going through. There's a bit about self-love. There's a bit about how does healing work, actually what healing is, because and I've been guilty as much as anybody else. You throw these wonderful comments out like channeling the light. But as our good friend Paul Gehry would say, what do you mean by that? And of course, it's then great to be able to sit down and actually sort of work out what it actually means. Dowsing comes into, but obviously with connection with upstairs, and you just hope they'll give you a few pointers.
I mean, all of the work that you're doing is absolutely built integrally into the subtle realms, and the subtle realms, part of their aspect, and the part of the reason we wrote Spirit and Earth together, was to try to explain how relatively simple it is to connect to those subtle energies, and also to how, in doing so, it reveals this concept of life after death. Yes. Which is it's a very obvious thing to say, but that is a life-changing acknowledgement. Once somebody realizes and absolutely allows that concept to sit into their life, your whole perspective on this reality changes. And that's my particular sort of hobby horse. A troubled house could be exhibiting spiritual activity of spirits, of past souls. You address that in the house healing process, don't you? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I call it soul rescue or spirit rescue. I think if somebody said to me 30 years ago that I would be moving spirits or moving people into the light, I would have laughed hysterically. It wasn't something that I ever wanted to do. But I think if anybody that's involved in any form of house healing really has to look at the spirit aspect anyway. People often say, well, it's a brand new house, there can't be any spirits in there. But of course, the more work people, tradespeople that actually come through the door, they can bring spirits with them. They like the energy patterns there and stay behind. And okay, so we're not dealing with a physical form. We're dealing very much more with a, if you like, electromagnetic or an auric field to move them through. But of course, if we're looking at, the work that I've done, I tend to find our soul is, rather than being inside us, is actually within our auric field. And if that's the case, and somebody's upset or they die and they're held back by family's grief, and of course, their aura and their electromagnetic field will stay behind. And of course, will start vibrating at the wrong level. It's a bit like two halves of a magnet in many ways. When they're alive physically, they can connect. But when they pass over and haven't gone to the light, it's almost like changing a magnet band and they start to repel. So even if it's your best mate, your mum, your dad, whatever else who hasn't gone to the light, there will always be if you like, a negative charge or a detrimental charge, because they're kind of disobeying the rules of the universe. But with most people, once you show them a vision of what awaits them as they move through, this vision of paradise, whatever they feel paradise should be, they normally move through very, very quickly. And I always tend to check afterwards to A, make sure they've arrived, and B, to make sure that they're happy. So yeah, there is definitely a life after death.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, no matter how many people would, try to talk to a cynic and say that there is life after death, look at all this evidence, that person actually has to have some kind of experience. They have to have to go through that learning themselves for them to actually kind of say, oh yeah, well maybe, and then the process of change in their own kind of established view. And our job is not to try to persuade people there is a life after death. I mean, heaven forbid.
Yes.
But absolutely, I think that what's interesting is that in sometimes working on somebody's house who may be skeptical about that whole concept of life after death, in achieving a change for them by doing the house healing work, which includes soul rescue, then you're allowing them to actually see and to have some kind of experience that, oh, well, something has changed. Adrian's come in and cleared a whole load of souls out of this house. It feels a lot better. What's going on there? That raises all of these questions. I think broadly speaking, it's a fascinating way to interact with the subtle realms and life in general, because it does start to sort of suggest that we are more than just the physical being. And as you said, the soul is probably very much out there. And I definitely believe that is far more, this ether, if you like, the subtle energies that are there, and earth energy being part of that, are far more connected to the role of consciousness than just, us sitting here. But anyway, there's another aspect that you look at when you're doing the house healing work, which is an aspect of consciousness, which is this idea and the concept of guardians of space, guardians like a spirit of place, even having a personality. Can you tell us a little bit about that side of things?
I often find when you walk into somebody's house, it can be part of the emotion left behind, but you do get a feeling in some people's houses that there is a feeling of bliss in there. And the family can still be in conflict, but you've got this wonderful spirit of home that's been built up over maybe several generations that is still there, and it has that calming effect on the family. But of course, if you go to somewhere, and we're talking slightly further up the scale, to go to somewhere like Avebury or any of the holy sites, sacred sites around you, any sacred wells, you're going to be looking at various guardians of the site, spirit of place. The Lady of the Well, it's been talked about for hundreds and hundreds of years. They do well dressing in places like Malvern and in Derbyshire. There's very much a female aspect to that side. Swallowhead Spring, just outside Avebury, is very much the divine feminine. We go down there and kind of start getting a headache after a couple of minutes, and it's a very polite way of saying, come on guys, go. This is very much more for the girls, not for the boys today. So all of this stuff, it's an earthly power, but very, very spiritually connected, if you can have such a thing. They obviously draw their energy from the universe, but also draw their energy from Mother Earth. So it becomes very much all encompassing. And if you can just tap in, if you can just make sure that they are happy with the family living in the house, or the house having been built on their patch, or a housing estate being built on their patch, they get a bit disgruntled. I mean, wouldn't we all? It's a bit like NIMBYism in the spirit world. That's fine, but can you go and put it in somebody else's guardian of the site patch? But often tuning in with them and just doing the healing work that we're doing often can pacify them massively. And often then almost like a parting shot with the family to say, whatever you're doing outside, always connect with the guardian, always connect with the spirit of place, and always connect with the spirit of home.
I think some people find it very unusual or surprising that actually, as a dowser, you can simply literally have a conversation with a place.
It is fascinating what is out there. And if you just sit, I would say to people, look, go and sit by a tree. Make sure the tree, if you can dowse, take a dowsing rod with you. or open your mind and start talking to the tree and say, is it okay for me to come and sit beside you? And if you get a nice feeling, then go and do it. If you feel a bit like, oh, no, perhaps I shouldn't, then move on to another one, because of course trees have feelings as well. They don't necessarily want some troubled individual sitting on their roots, leaving all their junk behind. But I do feel that, the more that we can get out into nature, the more we can connect with nature, the more that we start to believe that, planet Earth is a very special place to be. And I think this is the whole thing, Tim. The physical body loves it down here. How people fight to stay on this planet. Somebody's hooked up to a machine or even taken away from a machine. How the body keeps pushing to keep itself alive on this planet must tell us something about how special life is here.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things there, aren't there? Because one is that, the body, the physical mechanism of the physiology must have its own energy field and its own impetus and its own desires. I mean, it must do. And I think this is where it gets sort of connected to the thinking, the mental processes. And we talk about ego in sense of the identity of self, rather than the spirit, which is more always seeking to actually be aligned with everything else, with all that is, because it has the knowledge of everything, if you like, in that sense, or being connected to everything is what I mean. The other thing that you were talking about there, which I was also wanting to allude to when you were talking about guardians as well, which is that the part of the attraction of this work for me, the house healing work for me, is the implication that it helps open one's awareness of how intimately connected we are to the wider environment, to nature.
Yeah.
Guardian aspects are quite closely related, or can be quite closely related in my mind, to elementals, to the nature spirits. Tell us a little bit about that sort of side of your work and how you see it, reflecting the house healing, reflecting a sort of a wider concept of care and connection to the environment.
Certainly, let's come back to elementals in a second. I think if you look at, say, we're doing healing on water sources, water veins. As you do that, it has that massive connection. A little beck running at the back of the house, then suddenly connects with a little stream running at the back of the house. Or put it do for everybody that isn't living up north. It runs into a bigger river. It runs into the ocean. So you're not just doing localized healing. You're doing healing for the planet, and the more people that do it, the better it is. So, of course, if you can invoke the elementals, if you can invoke the nature spirits with your work, we're talking about sort of the earth, wind, fire, and water. But of course, from a Buddhist point of view, we've got to add the ether these days. It's so important that our spiritual connection using the ether. But I love them. It's amazing when you see a dog sitting outside just staring at something that isn't there, supposedly not there, and seeing it move. I always it's very much of a yes, there's something there. I often will talk to it. When I first got into my new house, I introduced myself to the spirit of place, the guardian of the site. I did a walk around the countryside, just introduced myself to all the nature spirits to say, look, apologies, guys, if one or two of you are still stuck in my house. You're going to be moved out appropriately and nicely. We're going to put you in some lovely spot to be in, because often they can cause the flickering of the lights. They can cause the computer to go off. There was one lovely, just to illustrate the fact, there was one lovely lady who'd been on a couple of my courses in her healing room, and she was aware of this little nature spirit sitting on her desk, and she said, will you just go to the light? She got it muddled up, sadly, and all she saw was this little person disappear into her computer screen, and the computer suddenly went bang, switched off. So I got a panicked phone call to say, what do I do? Well, first of all, you don't send the poor little chaps to the light. It's not a good idea. And it's just this lovely proof that these things exist. So we had to sort of coax the poor little chap out of the computer. And I was driving up the motorway at the time, so I had to sort of pull in and stop and do some further work. And he gradually sort of came out, and we moved him into the garden where they're happy. But, I think with any fairy tales, they go on for so many hundreds, if not thousands of years. There has to be a basis of fact there somewhere. And if you can connect that with the earth healing work you're doing, so we're connecting not just with Mother Earth, but also with all the the beings that we can't see that are there toiling away in the background. It's got to be part of our raison d'etre, not just connecting with spirit. It's important to bring the two, or bring as much as you possibly can together, to have maximum benefit for not just ourselves, the people we're working on, but also the countryside.
I think we're sort of in that phase, really. I think most of what we're seeing with the environment, what we perceive to be an environmental crisis, and I'm not saying it is or it isn't, is a sort of like a healing crisis, because I think, overall, the environment will survive with or without us. I mean, Spirit has always said that and always does say that, but we need to take action. We need to do something about it, and part of that is recognizing our connection to nature. So, Adrian, we could of course talk forever, and we probably will when we talk again. You've been kind enough to come on and talk about this stuff, but it's sort of like your opportunity to promote what you're doing. What have you got up your sleeve for the future? Anything particular, and where can people get hold of you?
Yeah, for the future, I put little pin up notices around the office, which obviously is hidden behind the camera, so you can't see them. But the next one I'm hoping is going to be a book on animal healing, but animal healing using the elementals. So that's going to be one that's going to be coming through. I haven't got a date for it yet. I've just got to wait for upstairs to give me the green light on that one. People get in touch with me, certainly the website, www.dowsingspirits.co.uk. You can email me, obviously the email address is on there as well. Generally, it's just a busy time for everybody that I think is involved in the sort of more the esoteric arts. I think also it's been an interesting time with the pandemic, how many more people have been out in the countryside. And they're sitting down, they're sitting on the rocks by the River Swale and just enjoying the countryside. So in some ways, there's been a lot of pluses coming out of the pandemic. There's obviously been an awful lot of not so nice stuff coming out of the pandemic, but it has given people, I think, perhaps a bit more of a connection with Mother Earth. So it's really, I think, trying to sort of keep that going with people, but in the most grounded way possible. And I think, very much like you, Tim, we talk in very grounded ways. It's easier for people to access that rather than using too many comments like channeling the light. We've got to try and find out what the light actually is.
So people can pick up your book from Amazon or from your website, obviously. And of course, we did mention earlier on, we have also the one that we jointly wrote together, which is Spirit and Earth, which is still a jolly good book.
Yes, yeah, I dipped into it the other day, and I really enjoyed it. And I still look at it thinking, with any book that anybody creates, I look back at the other books that I've done thinking, how? I guess you start off with one word, don't you? And then often it just flows from there. And I think Spirit and Earth, yeah, I'm really, really chuffed with that as well. It's a very different book, but it's a great read as well.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's a great introduction to the subtle realms and to say how easy it is. And, there's massive information in there. Yeah. So thank you so much. And we will be doing a live, you and I will be doing a live on this channel when I can get the technology to work from separate locations. Yeah. And that will be, when is that? The 11th of August.
Yeah.
11th of August, fantastic.
There we are. I'm glad to see you're organised it.
You would have thought I'd have made a note. It's on my planner. 11th of August, we'll be doing that. I look forward to that. That should be quite fun. So that'll be an hour of questions. Hopefully we'll have plenty of questions from subscribers and visitors.